Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast. Our primary objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never quit. The reality of life is simple. We all fall. We all fail. At times, we get knocked down. The question is, do we get back up? Are we stronger? Are we better prepared to attain the maximum of our potential? Thank you for joining our No Quit tribe. As you go for your greatness today, never quit. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. Welcome to episode number 513 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is believe. Our quote of the day comes to us from Kobe Bryant. If you don't believe in yourself, nobody else will. As we recently released our 500th episode, I wanted to once again thank you, our listeners, for your support of our show. The one request we do have is that if you have not yet subscribed to our show or left us a review, we kindly ask if you could please do that, as that really and truly helps us get our message out to a much wider audience. Thank you, and thank you for being a part of Team No Quit. I'm excited for today's guest. I recently read her book, Beyond Grit, and I knew that I had to get Cindra Kamphoff on our podcast. I hope you grab a pen, get ready to take some notes. I know you will enjoy today's episode. Cindra, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. It's going to be lots of fun, and I can't wait to talk to you.
I appreciate it. I have to segue this into, just because our listeners know, in your book, which is fantastic, by the way, Beyond Grit, we were talking offline. You have a quote in your book from Vanilla Ice. So I just have to say, not only did I absolutely love the book, but the fact that you have a Vanilla Ice quote in it, it just went to an all-time high.
That's awesome. Maybe because we're similar age. I don't know. I don't know if we are or not, but, I grew up listening to Vanilla Ice, and so I appreciate that hit home with you in your heart.
I think regardless of the age, every child should listen to Vanilla Ice at least 100 times at some point in their life. I'm going to stick to that.
100. That sounds awesome.
So wanted to ask you, as our company and our podcast, No Quit Living, the whole premise of our show is to inspire listeners to never give up. And I was curious if you had either a no quit story yourself or perhaps a really challenging time where you could have given up or given in, but you didn't.
Oh, so many. I guess two that come to my mind right away is, three. But I think about when I was writing this book, I had, the book Beyond Grit covers 10 practices of high performance. And at the beginning of writing the book, I had, the 10 practices laid out and then the super short chapters of the 10 practices. So I had my table of contents, and I expected the book to maybe be like 200 pages, maybe 150. And when I got halfway through, it was going to be more like, 300 pages. And I had a belief at the time, like, no one's ever going to read this. Like, I should just quit. And honestly, I did not write for 4 months when I was writing Beyond Grit, because it felt so overwhelming when I got in the middle that has so much left to go. And I have a coach who I've worked with for 10 years now, and she gave me the advice of making like a collage of all the people who I wanted to have read the book. And so what I would do is every day as I sat down, I would look at those people and then I would write the book for them. And I finished. And I'm so grateful I finished it, because it represents me, my philosophy of mental performance, but I also know it's helped a lot of people. So, and that's my first story. I got some marathon stories of not quitting. I've got my own college experience, my own college athlete experience where I definitely wanted to quit and didn't. So, every day we have thoughts probably of quitting.
So talking about your book, which again, for our listeners, it's a fantastic read. You've talked not just in the book, but I've seen some of your stuff about the mental and physical training. And I think, as a mental performance coach myself, when I first got into this space, I think the automatic default is there's the physical, there's the training, the lifting, all that stuff. And then the mental side is like this little small part on the side. But listening to some of your stuff, reading your book, but then just the plethora of information out there in this space, there's so much that I missed, and I think so many athletes and even coaches probably miss in the value of the mental side as well, because especially in a close game or match, the mental side can often impact the game just as much, if not sometimes more down the line, finishing up the game. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And the really cool thing is, I entered this field around 20 years ago, and there wasn't as much information about mental training. There wasn't really tangible strategies. There wasn't a lot of books that you could read that would really teach you how. And just the growth that I've seen in the field has been incredible. And some of it has been elite athletes talking about mental health and talking about their mindset and saying, "Hey, I work with a mental performance coach." And we know, Chris, that the best athletes in the world, they train their minds every day. They wouldn't be the best if they didn't train their mind every day. And so, I think just as everyday people, and I would still define myself as an athlete now. I like to still run every day, but not competing like I used to. But I still have to train my mind every day. As an entrepreneur, I know that the more I level up my own mindset, the more money I make. And it's really what's pushing my business is the belief in myself and the belief in the impact and the focus on other people and not getting in my head. So I think, it's a growing area, which has been incredible. And I think everybody needs to engage in daily mental conditioning just to step into our potential and make the impact that we're meant to make in the world.
I think you segue into a perfect question. And for someone out there maybe listening, or someone that will hear this down the road, and you talk about the idea of training your mind every day, for some people, I think that's a foreign concept where the pushback is, well, what does that mean? So I guess maybe a fun or a challenging question, but for someone who doesn't really have any idea what that is or how they could get into that, what would be a suggestion you would give somebody?
So I would say that training your mind includes two steps. First, starting your day in the right mindset that you want to start it in. And I could share a tool called the Grit Priming tool that I wrote about in Beyond Grit for Business that helps people prime themselves to have a great day. And then the second thing is using mental tools to get unstuck, to be on purpose. And I think about, like having a toolkit of mental performance tools. And sometimes athletes, when I'm working with them, will say, "Gosh, that tool, learn, burn, return, didn't really work." Or, I tried that tool that you told me, Cindra, about, the truth meter, and that didn't work. And I think we need like multiple tools to be able to regulate ourselves. And sometimes, one thing might not work instantly. And it's about training your mind and reducing that negativity bias. And so I think it's two things: starting your day in the right way, and then, throughout the day, using mental tools to get unstuck and be more on purpose to build confidence. My grit priming tool, should I share that with you,
Yeah.
Chris, in the audience? Okay. So people can download it at beyondgrit.com/morning. And it gives you like a PDF of the different practices and the different parts. So beyondgrit.com/morning. And I just say, a lot of people don't have a lot of time in the morning. So I say there's 4 steps. You want to do each step for 1 minute each. And you could do this as you drive to work. You could do this as you walk to practice. You could do this as you're in the shower, just times where you want, maybe even before a big meeting or before a big practice, a time where you want to really be at your best. Do this for 4 minutes. So G stands for gratitude. And that just means for 1 minute, think about what you're grateful for, right? And we can be grateful for the good things, the tough things, but just for 1 minute, there's so much incredible research about the power of gratitude and how it can be life-changing. Number 2 is remember. So R stands for remember your purpose. And that just means, why are you here? What's the positive impact that you make? How do you live your life for others, and how are you a role model? And just for 1 minute, imagine yourself that day, living your purpose. And purpose to me is like pulling back the layers of an onion, right? There's a lot of work you can do around that. And Beyond Grit, the second practice is about purpose and finding your purpose. I stands for intention. And that just means set your intention, 3 intentions for the day. And I usually describe that as an I will statement. And For example, Chris, the first time I did this grit priming, it was a Saturday and I was going to my son's basketball game. And one of my intentions was I will be fully present today at my son's basketball game. And that meant I didn't take my phone with me to the basketball game. I left it in my car, and I just was what I noticed just not even having my phone is I noticed things a little bit more deeply than I had before. I connected with his emotions and his behavior. I was just noticing even, more the way that the coach was connecting with the athletes. And then at the end of the game, he was like, Mom, you were really into the game today. Thanks for really paying attention. So that's the power of intention. And then T just stands for talk to yourself. And that would be the only thing in that grit priming routine that I would tell people to do consistently, meaning the grit, the G for gratitude, the R for remember your why, the I intentions, those can change every day. But I think the T for talk to yourself, the best way to do this is to write out, 10 to 15 statements that you want to say to yourself every single day. And then repeat those to yourself and think about, well, what do I need to believe about myself, to get to my goals? Or what do I need to believe about myself to thrive? And Chris, I've done this for 3 years now. Every day I say the same 10 to 15 statements. And one statement is, I give my life to serving others. Another statement is, I'm the best damn keynote speaker you've ever heard. I don't know if I am, but I try to be, right? And so what this allows you to do is, what you think about yourself, you become. And so you can, there's quite a bit of research that we know in sports psychology, if you pre-plan your thoughts, it'll help you in that moment when maybe the pressure feels like it's weighing on you, that you have some statements to go to. So grit priming, G for gratitude, R for remember your why, I for intention, T for talk to yourself.
I love that. And I think it's so interesting to have these conversations because there's always similarities, but a little bit different the way somebody teaches or coaches something. But going back to your story you shared about your son's basketball game, I just love the fact that he noticed that we were so intentional with being there. But I think selfishly, the other perspective is the phone just is a distraction all the time. And I love when I see families or people and there's an interaction and I don't know if they have a phone and I just want to go over and be like, do you have a phone or like, are you just not? And then if they would say like, no, I don't have, or I do, it's in my pocket. I say, you just want to give them a high five because I think the phone is amazing for what it can do, but it's such a distraction. So I love that, that you touched on that. We talk about with our clients and athletes a reset technique. And you and I were talking before we started recording about how you coach and teach athletes and people to let go of mistakes easily. And I think it's something that our listeners definitely would love to hear because I think as human beings, we always hold on to the negatives more than we hold on to or recognize or acknowledge the positives.
Amen. I think that just describes our negativity bias, which means, negative events get stored more quickly and they linger longer, and we all have that as humans. The reason for the, moving on quickly, why do we want to do it? I think there's two main reasons. There was a study conducted by two Harvard professors several years ago that found, well, I'm curious, Chris, what percentage of time do you think people are actually in the present moment?
20% maybe?
I know. So this study found, this was several years ago, and they found 47% of the time we are not in the present moment. So that means 53% of the time we are. The study was also titled, a wandering mind is a distracted mind and an anxious mind, which basically means, right, the more time that we spend in the future or the past, the more anxiety we can experience. And we can't be our best when we're not in the present moment. And so that's why we want to move on quickly from mistakes. And the second reason is, I don't know if you're familiar with Kristen Neff's work. So she's one of the leading researchers on the idea of self-compassion, which means being kind to yourself and, means recognizing that everyone suffers and taking more of like a mindful approach, meaning just like noticing when you're being really critical of yourself. And her research shows there's so many incredible benefits of self-compassion. including with your performance, higher happiness, decreased stress and anxiety. There's no downsides to being self-compassionate. And I think if you're anything like me, I used to think as a college athlete that the more I beat myself up, the better I would do. And I thought that was the way to motivate myself. And in fact, my college career was really up and down because I was so critical of myself. So the way that I teach this is 3 quick steps. And it rhymes, and it's in my book Beyond Grit in practice number 9, Live and Let Go, which I find is the most difficult practice of all the 10 practices. Right? We have a really hard time letting go, and even Chris, when I'm on stage and I ask people like, hey, raise your hand if you're an overthinker. Like 98% of the audience raises their hand. Yeah, because I think actually as high performers, like we have a tendency to overthink. So you could use this tool whenever you're overthinking. And so 3 steps: learn, burn, return. And that just means like ask yourself, what are you learning? And I like to use the prompt like, what would I do differently next time? Having more of like an easygoing approach when you fail or when you make a mistake or you're disappointed. And I think we need that learn before we have the reset technique, because sometimes what will happen is when I first started in mental performance, coaches would be like, well, if they're not learning, they're just going to keep on repeating the mistake, right? So that's why we need to take a step back and say, what did we learn? But try not to take it personally. I love this quote by Zig Ziglar, author and motivational speaker, and he said, failure is an event, never a person. We can take it so personally, right? So first step is learn. What are you learning? What would you do differently next time? And then you got to burn it. And this is where the reset technique comes in. There's a funny story about a Minnesota Vikings player that I've worked with for a super long time. In a playoff game a couple of years ago, he pretended to flush a toilet after he fumbled. That was his reset technique. Comes from a guy named Ken Ravizza, legendary guy in mental performance. So you could choose, what I do to burn it, which means let it go, is just like a snap. I'm going to move on that fast. But what's your reset technique? A phrase or an action would work. And then return just means you build yourself back up. And that means, I'm here for a reason. I got this. You're checking your body language. And I think you need to learn and the burn after the reset to really not take things as personally and keep learning and growing. So learn, burn, return. There you go.
So full and fair disclosure, that Zig Ziglar quote you shared is one of my absolute all-time favorites. I talk about it all the time when I get the chance to work with middle school, high schools, or even colleges. I always ask, who's failed the test, raise your hand. Who's failed the class, who's lost a game, and you go through it. And the reality is, everybody almost at a 99 or 100% rate has their hand up in one of those 5, 6, 7 questions I ask. And failure is an event, not a person. You failed that test. You failed that course. You lost that game. But you are not a loser. You are not a failure. You failed. You lost. But what do you do from it? And I love how you shared those 3 words. And then you had said before about overthinking and critical. I think there's a significant difference between critical or analytical. And I think so many of us, especially athletes and coaches, spend too much of that time on that critical side and not enough on the analytical side, because that's where you learn, that's where you grow. And I think it's important to acknowledge those mistakes, learn from them, but move on from them. Wanted to move on something that I'm actually really excited to get answered from you is you touch on a lot of this stuff, and we spoke before we started recording, and I said, and I want to preface it very, very carefully, I love this simplicity of the way in which you write. Not that in any way, shape, or form that your stuff is simple and easy, anybody can do it within a minute, but from the simplicity side, it's tangible. You can take 1 or 2 or 3 things right now. And I wanted to ask, is that intentional? And how did you come about with that strategy?
Yeah, Chris, thank you. Thank you for just like noticing that. It is very intentional. And I also think that it's very difficult to do. I couldn't have done this when I first, finished my PhD, because especially when you're going through your PhD, you learn all the research and it's hard to like put it into practice. And it's been many years of working with athletes and presenting and seeing what sticks. What do what do they keep talking about, right? And try to make it really sticky. The reason that I do this, and every chapter of the book, which is 52 chapters, I tried to give a tool. And the reason that I did that is because when I think about when I was struggling the most with my performance, which was in college, and my backstory is that in my senior year in high school, I ran the fastest mile in the state of Iowa, and so I had a lot of talent, and I really wanted to get to the Olympics. Like, wouldn't that be really cool? But in high school, it came to really easy to me. I think because I had a lot of support. My parents supported me. My dad was my own like inner coach, right? And then I got to college, and everyone was just like me. And then I didn't have that social support, or at least not there every day talking about building me up, right? And I just such a struggled with my own mental health. And I read a lot of books at that point in sports psychology. That's how I'm pursuing this, right? Why I'm still in this profession is to figure my own self out, And what I needed at the time was simple, tangible tools. And I even saw a sports psychologist, and she was helpful somewhat, but it was so theoretical that I didn't know what to do when. So I try to really spell it out. When you're facing self-doubt, do this. When you're having a struggle letting go of a mistake, do this. When you're overthinking, do this. And because it's like we need that prescription, because just because we know it doesn't mean, right? What is the saying? Common sense doesn't mean common practice. And even though I know all the stuff in my book, I have to use it every day.
I love that, and I think it's so refreshing to hear that, because this is a space that I've become just fallen in love with over the last few years. But I'm always reading, I'm always learning, listening to new podcasts, different YouTube videos, and I think some of the most incredible people in this field and all fields in general are the ones that stay curious. Speaking of curious, I'm actually extremely curious to get your answer to this question. The Jim Rohn famous quote, "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with." If I could grant you dinner tonight with any 5 people, dead or alive, that you could level up with, who would you pick?
Oh my gosh. Oh boy. 5 people that I could level up with. Well, I think I would have Jim Rohn there. I have been really thinking a lot about branding right now, and I love seeing people who are in this space, not necessarily working with athletes, but like how they got to where they are, right? And so I think of someone like Jamie Kern Lima, who I just listened to this. She just has come a book out with called Worthy. I would have Oprah Winfrey there because I think she's so inspiring. I would have a guy named Daniel Amen there because I love his concept of automatic negative thoughts. And I would like to talk to him more about that. And then, oh boy, I would love to have my grandma there. Her name was Geneva. And I'd love to just get her insight. So that's Chris, that's right off the top of my head. If you asked me that question in about 10 minutes, maybe I would slightly change my answer. But that's what I got right now.
It's funny you say that, because over the last few years doing this podcast, I've asked that question or a similar question, and my list, I think, probably has gone from 5 to about 120, and depending on what day of the week it is, what time of the year it is, I think I have a totally different answer. But it's a fun question because there's no obviously right or wrong answer. But the other thing I've found is that depending on where I am, so if I'm writing a book or if I'm getting ready for a specific talk or something like that, and I'm studying something, obviously you'll be a little bit more overweight in that sense or in that area. But it's a fun question. You're writing a new book, which is exciting, and it's about confidence. So wanted to ask, what led you to writing a book about confidence?
What led me to writing this book is because as I've worked with entrepreneurs, CEOs, elite athletes, professional teams, the common struggle that I see is with confidence. And it doesn't matter if someone has been in the NFL for 10 years, their confidence can waver. Or if they own, Amazon. I'm just thinking like some of the biggest companies in the world. And so confidence can fluctuate. I see confidence as several different things. I see it as a decision that we can make every day. I think it's something that we can nurture, and it's also a feeling. And sometimes people get the feeling, they believe that, like, the belief in self, and they let their feeling of confidence impact their belief in their self themselves. And on my podcast called The High Performance Mindset, I interviewed Robin Veely, and Robin is she, decades of research on confidence, and I love what she said about how that confidence is a feeling and a belief in self, right? And I think that's helpful to know that that feeling of confidence can fluctuate. And what are you doing to increase that belief in yourself? That's the power of self-talk. That's the power of the T. Talk to yourself and being really intentional with what you say to yourself every day. There's during the last Olympics, I was doing some work with the USA track and field team, and there's a long jumper named Quenisha Burks that said to herself every day, I will be an Olympian. And she videoed herself doing it, and then she became one. And there's this really incredible 1-minute TikTok video that went viral. It just kind of shows you the power of talking to yourself. And I think, I did this. I'm always learning too, Chris, like you. And I went through this training called Reset, and it's with a fellow sports psychology practitioner named Ashley Kutcher. And Ashley studied with Kristen Neff, who is one of the leading researchers on self-compassion. And I love the way that Ashley and Kristen talk about your inner coach versus your inner critic, right? And the way I kind of think about this, Chris, is like your inner critic is like Darth Vader. Do you like watching Star Wars? And it's like, it's binary, it's rude, it's harsh, it overgeneralizes. That inner critic usually comes, that voice can be like, the voice can be a time or of a person that you were people that, criticized you. But your inner coach is wise. It's like Yoda. It's wise and calm. It talks to yourself like your best friend. And the really incredible thing is we get to choose. Now, I think this has to be a daily intention, because even though I know the stuff, just like the stuff, like I can listen to my inner critic a lot, right? And so I have to be really mindful of noticing. And there's a tool I call the truth meter. Can I share it with you now?
Please do.
Okay. And it just means when we notice ourselves being really critical of ourselves, or we have the automatic negative thoughts like Daniel Amen might describe, it means that we ask ourselves 3 quick questions. And that's what the truth meter is. Question 1, is this even true? And usually it's not true. Usually we're lying to ourselves. Number 2 is this thought serving me? Is this helping me right now? And when I do this with athletes or performers, the answers are usually like, is this true? Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. But then, the answer to question 2 is always, no, it's not serving me. And number 3 is, what's a new, more empowering thought that I could choose right now? And, the power of that is you can choose a different thought. It's not always easy, but you can choose a different level of focus. And when I think about growing confidence, that truth meter is one way to do that, because it is one of the strongest predictors of performance is our belief in ourselves.
I love that you touched on the truth meter and you referenced talking to yourself, an inner critic, versus some of the ways you spoke about it. I often coach and teach the concept, and I know we've all heard of it in some way, shape, or form, is talk to yourself more than you listen to yourself. And I remember the first few times I heard that, I was like, what does that mean? I didn't understand it. But our fear, our doubt, our anxiety, it's always there and it's always present, which is why you then need to talk to yourself. And you have some really good strategies with that, which I love. Wanted to ask a follow-up question in regards to confidence. Very different from confidence is pressure, but the best of the best handle pressure, I guess, differently, better. Is there one common thing that you've seen with some of the most elite athletes or performers that you've worked with that just they understand or have a better understanding of handling pressure?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Great question. What's interesting about pressure and the feeling of pressure is it tends to be a future-based emotion. We tend to feel pressure when we're focused on the future. And so, we feel pressure because the outcome is important to us. we feel judged by the outcome, and we feel like we're responsible for the outcome. Now, as I said, those three statements, they're all outcome focused. And so what's helpful to know is that, I think we all experience pressure in some ways. I experience pressure sometimes. You experience pressure sometimes. Elite athletes, my son who plays basketball, both my sons, they feel pressure when they get in the game. And so I think what's important is I have a tool in my book called Pop the Pressure. And it just means like, here's three things that you could do when you feel pressure. Number one is a power breath. And usually I just teach like a 4-4-4 count. Just count in for 4 counts in your nose, hold for 4, breathe out for 4. And you want to count with it because your mind can't think about what you're anxious about and feeling pressure at the same time you're counting, right? O stands for opportunity. And so that just means like, look at what the opportunity here is. And, how are you meant to do what you're doing? And that's how I would answer that. Well, how the best, deal with pressure is in moments where they want to do really well and that are meaningful to them. They have self-talk and this belief that, hey, I'm meant to be here. I'm meant for this moment. And, just reminding yourself, hey, I'm meant to do this work. I'm meant to be right here. And then the other P is it's process. And that means instead of the outcome, we want to stay focused more on the small steps. So, some of my work with like USA Track and Field during the last Olympics is we would have 3 or 4 process goals. What are the small things you're going to do? If you were thinking, I want to win today, that feels like a lot of pressure. And I usually even have like this 24-hour rule where 24 hours before the event, no thinking about winning. Because that just causes way too much pressure, like zero. You want to stay more focused on like, what do you want to do? Okay, so I want to compete with my best effort. I want to run fast today. I want to get, a good push off on the blocks. Those are things that you want to imagine. And sometimes I think athletes close to the competition, they imagine themselves winning in the outcome. And I just think that causes way too much pressure and anxiety. It's not helpful. And usually then in the moment, you can crumble under the pressure.
I love that. And I often talk to my clients about process before results. And I think it goes hand in hand. Before we ask the last question, wanted to just ask if you wouldn't mind telling our listeners what's the best way for them to follow you, find out more about you if they want to connect with you, but also best way for them to get your book as well as listen to your podcast.
Cool. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate you asking that. You can head over to Dr. Cindra, so DrCindra. And the podcast is called The High Performance Mindset. You can get anywhere you find podcasts. We just celebrated our 600th episode, which is insane. And then the book Beyond Grit is over at Dr. Cindra. I also have a team of coaches now. My company is called the Mentally Strong Institute, where we work with executives and athletes. If you want to learn more, you can just send me an email at cindrakamphoff.com. This is a way to reach me if you'd like.
I love that you give your email address because I do as well. And I think it's important to stay, connected to people. And I love that you do that. And then last question I have for you is if you have any parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners today.
Parting words. I think the most important thing that we talked about today is writing out between 10 and 15 statements that you want to say to yourself every day. And I think the power of that is what you think about yourself, you become more of. And so being really intentional with your belief in yourself and your identity and your own self-worth is really key. And then I would just say, like, whoever is listening, as they're listening, one of the really important things is to remember that your purpose is unique and no one else has the same mix of experiences and gifts and dreams and strengths as you do. And the more that you keep owning that, the more you can make the impact in this world that you are meant to make. So remember, your purpose is unique and you have unique experiences and skills, and step into those more today.
I love that. And for our listeners, definitely, I would highly recommend not only listening to Cindra's podcast, but grab a copy of her book, and just want to thank you again for being here today. I hope that we can connect again soon, and thank you for your time.
This was so fun. So thank you so much for sharing and doing the podcast and making a positive impact in the world.
Thank you for listening to episode number 513. Cindra touched on many different things, from believing, learning, and how you addressed failure. As we conclude today's episode, what is your reset technique? After a miss or a shortfall, how do you reset? And if you don't have one, perhaps it is time for you to establish your own reset technique. And it could be personal and or professional. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.